run all and setup. Setup is the one that runs the drivers. And then in the package.json, you want to copy zombie, selenium, web component tester, Chrome driver, polyclean, and polyserve. This is for the recording sake. Yay. All right. The next thing we want to do is we have one test out here, the Esri map test. And I just want to step through this and show you the spec runner and then also how this sucker kind of works. So I'm going to go ahead and relaunch our command here. So we're going to run npm run start, which in the package.json runs this script, node assets elements test setup.js. And then it'll pop up a browser window for us again. And it's going to dump you off at the root of the project, which doesn't really help anybody. So in the browser window, you're going to have to go to your test file. So it'll start up at components, VTS web internal. You'll put in assets, elements, test, and then here you'll hit esri-map.test. All of these have .test.html, and we'll be able to load up this test runner. This is just for this one element, and it is telling us that I didn't finish the upload shapefile. So we're just going to kind of ignore that for the moment. Because what I want to do is actually build a new test from scratch, and we'll show everybody kind of how you put one together. And some of this content I'll paste out in a shared drive or something, or send out an email with some of this content so you guys can put it in your notes. But what I want to do is test one that Alicia currently had a bunch of problems with, and that is the VTS what is it? Activity grid. Sound fun, Alicia?
Yeah, sounds like a blast.
Yep. So what we're going to do is create a new HTML file from this element. And we'll call it .test.html. So it's named the element .test.html. So I'm going to come in here with a blank HTML page. So what I'm going to do then is I'm going to cheat, and this is the part I want to share with you guys later, is actually put in a boilerplate. So I'll pass this boilerplate around so everybody's got it, but I just want to talk through what's in the boilerplate. Just going over the includes. Style sheet, web components light.js, the Mocha style sheet, and then Mocha and Sinon. And then you're going to set Mocha to behavior-driven development, and then to have Chai. And there then you'll remap assert and expect, because so many of your examples will have assert and expect as a global level object, and Chai, the latest versions of Chai, you would have to go get it from chai.expect. The next thing is jQuery.js and the test fixture, which is this guy right here. And then all of the elements. So we're going to load elements.html. That way you have all of the dependencies when you go to try to test something, so that all gets in there correctly. The next thing you want to do is have an ID div that Mocha can present its results in to you so you can see them. And then do not forget this guy. This runs Mocha, and then it returns the output to the window. And then if you go and you look at run all, you'll see here that when all of these are done, it's going to go and grab the stats array, which it runs each test and basically says, hey, window, are you done? And then get me the stats from your tests. So this is how you report back to the build services whether your test succeeded or not. So do not forget that line, or it's pointless on the build server. Okay. From here then, what do you think we should do? Anybody have any guesses on what we should do inside the fixture? What element are we testing?
Activity grid.
So what should we put in there, Alicia, since you spoke up?
Probably a tag to call the activity grid.
Exactly. So VTS activity grid, and I'm just going to give it a project ID of 1, even though I don't really have this. So keep in mind, this isn't connected to the server at all. You're running the element in kind of a standalone mode. So it doesn't really matter what ID you give in there or what other properties you set. So we've set the project ID. What's a good test to start with?
It would be nice to know if it's loading.
Okay, let's do one step at a time. Can we assert that the project ID is 1 on the element?
Sure.
Sure. Okay, I'm going to cheat and jump ahead here. I've got some helper scripts. So that we don't have to code these over and over and over and over again and try to get through this relatively quickly. So I'm going to go grab the fixture. So that's what this is. We're going to go get the test fixture, get the first one out of that. You guys have seen that in Polymer. And then we're going to describe VTS activity grid. So this is our test descriptions. So when we're doing our behavior driven, that's one thing we have to do there. The next thing we have to do is run the before each method that's built into describe. We need to get the element from the fixture. So element equals fixture.create. So it's going to instantiate the fixture, create the element so that we can use it elsewhere in our tests. The next thing we want to do in Mocha is to actually create a context. So a context is basically a set of tests. So a good context for what we're talking about is property test. We want to just test the properties. So I'm going to grab this from another screen so you guys can just see this kind of come in. But our first context will be our property tests. And inside the property tests, what should be a good behavior for this? So I'm just going to show you guys how I wrote this, and it says that VTS activity grid should have a project ID equal to 1. Can everybody validate that that's a good place to start for tests? All right. The next thing I want us to look at is how to actually use Chai. So Mocha is the test runner, and Chai is the actual assertion capabilities of this. So this is what we've got here. So if we want to use should, Chai should, or Chai expect, or Chai assert, you can assert equal like we do in our C# tests, or you can say expect foo to equal bar, or expect foo if it's an array to have a length of 3, or to be a string. All of these are different ways to do this. Primarily when you see Chai done, you'll see expect kind of as the main one. So I'll put the link to this expect guide, but remember that you can also use assert the same way you would. But most of your examples when you go Google, you're going to see them kind of go for the expect in behavior driven development. So we would say expect, I can type, expect what? Anybody? We've got an element here. What should we expect off of?
Well, shouldn't we expect the element dot project ID to be 1?
Exactly. So we expect element, if I can type, project ID to 1. Very simple test, but what do you guys think?
Yeah, do we need to worry about, I mean, what if the project ID 1 doesn't exist yet? Is that something we've set up already with our fixture?
I've set project ID to 1 as it starts off, but you're referring to asynchronous.
Right.
And
Yeah, okay.
I'm going to cover asynchronous here in a minute. So,
well, that's a safe navigation issue too in your tests.
Correct. So this is a synchronous method. We will talk about asynchronous here in a minute when we load data, and we do some assertions off of loaded data. But this is a synchronous method that's just going to check that this got set when the fixture got created. Okay, so let's move over to our test framework here, and we'll go to BTS activity grid.test.html. And look, there's our grid, and project ID is equal to 1. Sweet. That's all it takes to run these tests. So we have 100% passing off of our single test. Cool, huh? Let's go look at the console. Check this out. It's trying to make the request, but it's not working. So keep in mind that this grid, after you set the project ID, automatically tries to go out and do its thing, and will fail royally when it tries. The other thing that it's seeing is that the user is not defined. So we're going to mock a couple of these things, which JavaScript's super cool to mock, and we're going to go ahead and take care of the user part. So I'm going to go and grab this from over here and just set up here at the top that we want user to be something, and is read only will come later, and we want it to return true. This user is read only. So we'll relaunch this and check out our console. User still not defined in elements.html, which is way up in the stack. So let's go move this guy on up above elements.html. This is arranging or mocking some of the stuff that we need. So now we should have that error handled. Cool. And now we just have our web request that's not working. So now everybody's like, cool, I can do some mediocre tests, but how do we test like we're hooked up to the API? And here comes the magic part of Sinyan. And if I'm mispronouncing that, tell me. I don't really care how they pronounce it. I know the library is stinking cool. So the first thing we need to do is figure out how this request is being made. It's using jQuery, and it's using XHR. So we've talked, with some of you and I have talked between fetch and XHR, and all of jQuery stuff uses XHR. So what we want to do is we want to override XHR and actually mock it. So the cool thing is Sinyan gives us a way to make that happen. So as the test is being set up, we're going to say this.xhr is use fake XML HTTP request. Cool, huh? The next thing we want to do is intercept all of these requests. So every request that comes in, we want to intercept it and push these requests into this.request. So we've got our requests here. So what's the first thing that we can probably do when it comes to this? Should we maybe test that we're creating the right URL to go to the server? Would that be something cool to test? Yeah? No? Maybe?
Yep.
Sure. All right, so first off, we're going to create a new context because we do the rest of our properties and we test the rest of our properties here. You guys get how that kind of extrapolates out. But we want to do our grid load test. We want to make sure data gets loaded into our grid. Where is my ending bracket here? Might help if I didn't have that. Next thing we want to do is kind of say, hey, I want to load the grid from the project ID. So I'm just going to say it should load from project ID. If I can have proper English. Should load grid from project ID. So what's the first thing that we should do here? Figure out what a mocking context looks like, right? So I've already stepped ahead here. We've already made this request to this guy, which has one activity in it. So I'm going to go in here and I'm going to grab the response out of here and basically make a JSON object out of it for our response. So before each, well, up here I want to just say var activities grid response, and we'll say JSON dot stringify this object. Now we have a string of that dude. So the activities grid response is our content that's going to be coming back from the service. So right here, we want to intercept this guy and push that data back. But you can't do that right away, so we need to set a timeout. And we're going to set that timeout for, I don't know, probably nothing. 10 milliseconds or so is probably plenty. And then when that request comes across, we want to say xhr, if I can type, xhr.respond with a 200 code. We've got to tell it the MIME type, or the headers, the response headers. So I'm going to tell this guy that it's going to respond with JSON, and then we're going to give it the activities response, and that will be our response there. So we've now mocked our response. If we go and we reload this guy, you'll see in our console that this error went away as far as making that request. Not everything is working hunky-dory yet, though, because we still have get roles is not a function and some other things going on. So user.getRoles is not a function. It doesn't know what to do with that one. And we've got to go figure out how to mock it. So I'm going to basically go up here to the user and say $user.getRoles equals a new method, and it doesn't have any roles right now. If we reload this, we should have data in our table with no backing server. Does anybody think this is cool? Yes, no, maybe?
Very cool.
All right. So one good thing to test here is, hey, because I'm running out of time, I'm going to kind of skip ahead a little bit, but the main thing we want to say is, hey, did it load the data properly from what I expected it to send? So should load grid data from the project ID. So I'm going to set a timeout because this all doesn't happen very quickly. Very quickly being 200 milliseconds or so, I hope. And we want to expect that the element has data. So what we're going to have to do now is go look at the element. So we have the element here. We can say element dot $. Oh, look, there's the activities grid. And now we need to get the data off the activities grid. One easy way to do that, just to know if it loaded data, is let's go get the total record count. Hey, there's one record there. So that sounds like something good to assert on. So we'll drop this guy in here. So we'll expect that to equal one row. Okay. Let's rerun this guy, and it's going to blow up on us still. Any idea why? Did I do anything with done? So this is an asynchronous method that has to have something done with done to tell the test it's over with. This is one of the biggest gotchas that I see happen when people are writing these tests, is they forget to finish off their method. So what you have to do is literally just call it like a method. Hey, I'm done. I'm done with this test. So let's rerun it.
Quick question. If you do that, then why do you need the timeout?
So the timeout is going for the grid load data. So what's happening right now is this is still failing, even though there's one in here, because of the grid failure. Because the data hasn't loaded yet. It hasn't stepped through that call. So if we go to our component here, I'm just going to make this bigger so we can see the code a little bit better. And we go to our test, so we can actually debug some of this stuff. By the time the set timeout happens, the records aren't loaded quite yet. So total record count is undefined. The activities grid is just getting going. It hasn't received a response yet. So not found is still up there, and it's just going to fail. So what we really need to do is figure out what our time length is on this response. And I'm going to bump this up to 500 milliseconds that we're going to wait for that response to get back. The other thing you can do is use like a when available. You can sit there and just wait for it and then say, okay, it's done, because we have that as well. So in the code, so I'll just relaunch this real quick, and it will pass this time, hopefully. Oh, well, I let it hang for too long. If you let it hang for 2 seconds, it blows up on you. But 501 milliseconds, it should have the load grid from project ID, and it did have the data there. The other thing you can do is use a method called when_defined. So when_defined, and you can say element dot $sign dot activities grid, and then what is that? Total record count. So from here, then you're going to give it the context, and because it's checking a property, it's kind of a hackish way to do this, but then it will actually tell you when it's defined. So it looks something like this, and when it's defined, it will do the callback. Now let's go implement this real quick, and I'll show you guys how it works. Instead of using a timeout, we can just wait for the total record count to come back. And we'll move all this guy up to the method here. I apparently moved my parentheses instead of curly brackets. So now we're going to wait for total record count to be defined on the activities grid. And then after it's defined, then we will be off to the races to do our assertion. So let's rerun this guy and see how much time it actually takes for that to come back. 369 milliseconds is when that guy comes back ready to be done. So more than 200, less than 500. Okay.
You set a max on that? I mean, it might not be built into when defined, but you could wrap it, I suppose, with a maximum weight.
Well, your maximum weight for any of these JavaScript tests currently is 2,000 milliseconds, or 2 seconds.
Oh, where's that set?
So that's set in Mocha, and what you're going to have to do to overwrite it is you have to overwrite it. So Mocha, I'll pull up the link and I'll send it to you. So when you have the done, you can say this.timeout equals 200 milliseconds. So if we run that, this test will blow up because it'll be less than 200 milliseconds. And timeout 200 milliseconds exceeded. You better do that. So, hey, that's way easier. I forgot how to do that. So, 4 seconds, and off we go. But realistically, if it doesn't get done in 2 seconds, it should get done in 2 seconds. Is kind of where I'm getting at there. So this.timeout. Put that in my notes to share with everybody. So,
yeah, that's cool because you get two tests in one there, basically.
Yes, you get a performance test to a certain extent as well. So I don't want to deep dive too much more than this, but I wanted to make sure we knew how to mock a response. and how to get those things done correctly. Now, what you'll have to do is you'll have to say this.fetch, if you're going to mock any of the state engine ones, or you can just mock this.state engine equals the, override state engine. If you're going to make a state engine one and say get returns this, and just override it. So an example of that would be when you set up a test and you say state engine dot project dot get equals, and you just override it. And this is the beauty of JavaScript. You can say function, or I'll just do my shorthand, and this returns project and whatever your project definition is. And then when you call that, when your system calls that in its element, it will get your overridden value in JavaScript. So mocking's way easier in JavaScript because you can just override it, and that's how it works. Does that make sense to everybody if you're wanting to mock the state engine?
Yep.
That's why it's there, by the way. Okay.